What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's nice and simple. I'm going to go through some of the best value players that you might want to think about including for your Game Week 1 squads. If you do enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content over pre-season. And don't forget to check out Fantasy Football Hub, 50% off at the moment. Links in the description below. All right, let's start with João Pedro, a 5.5 million forward for Brighton, who last season was first choice penalty taker as well. And I don't really see any reason why they would change that. Obviously, De Zerbi's not in charge anymore. They got Gjertsås there instead. But João Pedro's record is pretty good, so I don't know why they would take him off penalties. So all round for 5.5 million, he looks pretty good. The one thing to consider during pre-season is how many minutes you think he will get, because Brighton did rotate quite a lot last year, but also they were in Europe. So I'm pretty confident João Pedro will see more game time this season than he did last year. And if you look at that Brighton squad and think about their best 11, I think João Pedro is probably part of that. And if that's the indication we get during pre-season under the new manager, then he is just a really good value option at 5.5. I don't think there's any debate around that. The underlying numbers are good too. 0.35 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.2 expected assists. And his actual returns were decent too. If I just bring him up here, I think it was 9 goals. And yeah, 9 goals, 3 assists in 19 starts. And I think the interesting thing for me is FPL didn't put his price up. So he was 5.5 last year. He gets 12 attacking returns, including 9 goals. And the price stays the same. Whereas if you look at someone like Muniz at Fulham, which we're going to talk about later, he had a really good season as well. 9 goals, 2 assists. So 1 less attacking return, but he went from 4.5 million right up to 6. So he's actually more expensive than João Pedro, and he's not on penalties. I still think he's a good option. Like I said, I'll talk about him in a minute. But I don't know, João Pedro just seems too good to be true. If during pre-season, there's a lot of debate around who's going to start for Brighton, and João Pedro is not definitely going to be in that 11, then maybe I would just avoid him. But right now, that 5.5 million price tag looks pretty good, especially with the fixtures they've got as well. Everton away, Man United at home, Arsenal away first 3, and then Ipswich at home and Forest at home. Arsenal away is not ideal, but potentially if you've got a squad with playing players on the bench, you might even be able to bench João Pedro for Game Week 3 and just play him in the fixtures outside of that. He just feels too good to turn down. I know we've only got 3 forward spots, and there's a lot to consider, a lot of options out there. But if he's going to get regular minutes with penalties as well in that Brighton team, who, you know, maybe they won't be quite as attacking as they were under De Zerbi, but will still be good. So I like him. As you might imagine, I've already mentioned him a lot during my videos, and that will probably continue, but he looks really good. So Chris Wood is another forward to consider if you're looking for someone cheap. He comes in at 6 million, obviously playing for Nottingham Forest. And I think my general feeling is if you're looking for someone 6 million or below as an attacker, the options in the forward category are better than those in the midfielder category. It's not that there's no one to choose when it comes to midfielders 6 million or below, but in terms of goal threat and or penalties, the forwards probably provide better value. That being said, to kind of counter my own point here, you've only got 3 forward spots, so it might actually be easier to fit a cheap midfielder in because there might be 3 other forwards that you want to go for. So it's something to think about, but the value in the forwards is definitely there. In terms of his goal threat, 0.58 non-penalty expected goals per 90, so way higher than João Pedro. I don't think that Chris Wood will have penalties. I think that will be Gibbs White as first choice for Forest, but his goal threat from open play is still there. Last season, if I just double check here, I think he got even more goals. I think he hit double figures and did really well under Nuno in particular. Yeah, 14 goals, 1 assist in 1,800 minutes, so 20 starts and got 15 attacking returns. Pretty decent. And the fixtures are very good for Nottingham Forest as well. So it's Bournemouth at home, Southampton away, Wolves at home, Liverpool away a bit tougher, but then it's Brighton away and Fulham at home. So he is someone you could keep in the kind of short to medium term and is at a good price. The only caveat I would say is minutes, right? So it's all well and good saying these cheap forwards are really good value. There is competition there. His main one is probably Awani. Now, to be fair, Awani got injured last season, but Chris Wood kind of made that number 9 spot his own. And Forest played really well when he was in the team. So I suspect, with Nuno still there, Chris Wood will be first choice. But that is something we'll have to keep an eye on during pre-season, just to see if we get any indication about who's going to start. But I really like him. When you've got the fixtures and that price and that goal threat, Chris Wood could be really good value. So Christopher Nkunku's up next, a 6.5 million midfielder for Chelsea, and I've got pretty high hopes for what he might do this season from an FPL point of view. And obviously you do have other good attackers at Chelsea like Nicholas Jackson at 7.5 and Cole Palmer at 10.5, but realistically you're always looking for the next Cole Palmer, and Nkunku at 6.5 could be that player. I don't think he's going to get penalties, even though his record is pretty good, because Palmer was amazing at them last season. But even without penalties, there are plenty of returns that he could get. Now, last year, only 3 goals in the league for Chelsea, but he only started twice. And the underlying numbers were pretty encouraging in the very small amount of minutes that he actually got. 0.51 non-penalty expected goals per 90. And looking at previous seasons at RB Leipzig, you know, we're looking at 16 goals, 4 assists in 25 matches the season before he joined Chelsea. The season before that, 20 goals, 13 assists in 34 matches. His record is pretty decent, and there is a great player there. He just has to remain fit. Now, Chelsea, like a lot of other clubs, are under new management now, and we'll have to wait and see how they set up. But I think a bit like João Pedro, if you think about what Chelsea's best 11 would look like, surely Nkunku is part of that, whether he's off the left, playing as the central striker, or even playing as a second striker. He's going to be in that team, and he's got that eye for goal. And after City at home in game week 1, the fixtures are pretty good. I wouldn't say Chelsea have a run of green fixtures like Ipswich, Leicester, Southampton all at home in a row or anything like that. But from game weeks 2 to 6, it's Wolves away, Palace at home, Bournemouth away, West Ham away, and Brighton at home. I think that just looks pretty good. And that's why his ownership's already at 13.6%. So I don't think this is a player that is definitely going to hit the ground running. Obviously, he was out for so long last year, but if he can get a good pre-season under his belt, it's not like he's been away for the Euros or anything like that. The pedigree is definitely there. So are the fixtures. And he is just a good player, right? It's just whether or not that will translate to FPL. And I think for 6.5, there could be some extremely good value there. So next is a defender that a lot of people pointed out to me on the first stream I did this season. And that is Barco at Brighton, who's a left back listed for just 4 million. So pretty cheap. Now, before you get too excited, the opening 3 fixtures for Brighton are not necessarily ideal for clean sheets. You've got Everton away, Man United at home, and then Arsenal away. Now, with cheap defenders, you can always put them in your Game Week 1 squad, put them on the bench, and then have them for the better fixtures later on. And Brighton do have that. In Game Week 4, it's Ipswich at home, and in Game Week 5, it's Forest at home. The problem is there's no guarantee that he would still be first choice left back at that point, because obviously Brighton have Estupiñán. Now, at the moment, he is injured, and according to the FPL site, he's expected back on the 14th of September, which would be Game Week 4, because we've only got 3 game weeks of the season before the first international break. I don't want to put a dampener on the videos, but there is an international break between Game Weeks 3 and 4, so there's plenty of time for Estupiñán to get back fit. So it might be that you put Barco in your team, and by the time you want him for that Ipswich fixture in Game Week 4, Estupiñán could be back in. Now, it might be that Barco is favoured by the new manager. It might be that Estupiñán has a setback. It might be that they bed him back into the team slowly. We just don't know. But potentially, if Barco is going to play regularly, 4 million for a Brighton defender is really good value. You can just stick him on the bench, ready for those good fixtures, have more money to spend elsewhere. He would be in everyone's teams if we knew his first choice. But right now, it does feel a little bit risky. And I do think because of the way the transfers are going to work this year, where you can possibly save up to 5, which most of us are not going to do regularly, but getting to 3 or 4 might happen. It could be that people choose to wildcard a little bit earlier than normal. So, for example, if you make a squad that's decent for the first 3 to 4 weeks, you might not have to make transfers in the first few game weeks if you're, if you get lucky with injuries and stuff like that. Then you wildcard into the team that's looking good, and then you've still got those transfers ready for later on. So it's possible that people might go a little bit early with wildcard, and if that happens, you can maybe decide what to do around game weeks 4 and 5 when the fixtures get better for Brighton, rather than going for him straight away. But I wanted to talk about him because for 4 million, he could be decent. There is definitely some risks there. So next we got another defender, Davern, who costs us 4.5 million. And the fixtures for Newcastle to open the season are pretty decent. So it's Southampton at home in game week 1. Then it's Bournemouth away, Spurs at home, Wolves away, and Fulham away. Now, it would probably look a little bit better if one of those away games was at home. But to get a Newcastle defender for 4.5 feels like pretty good value, especially when the likes of Trippier and Schär are 6 million and 5.5 million respectively. Now, to be fair, Trippier is very attacking. He got 10 assists last season, 9 assists the season before, and that's why you pay that premium. But 1.5 million is quite a lot of a saving, especially when a lot of other attacker prices like Palmer, Haaland, etc. have all gone up. We're going to be looking to make savings somewhere, and Davern could be that player. Now, is he 100% nailed on? I would say probably not. But with Botman out for the start of the season, I'm not expected back till December, I do think that Davern will play at the start of the season. Not necessarily for the whole season, but at the start, I don't think there'll be too many issues because Lascelles was the player that came in for Botman quite regularly at centre-back, but he's also injured as well. Now, they have signed Lloyd Kelly, and I think both Kelly and Byrne can play left-back and left centre-back, but it might be that they both play. I think the majority of people, and maybe even Newcastle fans, would prefer to see Lewis Hall or Livramento playing left-back while Trippier is right-back, but I'm not sure that's what Eddie Howe will do, and Dan Burn has been a regular in his team for a while now, so I think Dan Burn is going to start the season, and 4.5 looks good. As always, right, there's a long time to go until the deadline. We can see the pre-season matches and who's lining up, who's likely to be in that 11 for game week 1. But I got a good feeling it will be Dan Burn, and 4.5 looks pretty good. I just wish one of those away games, at least, was at home instead, just to make that fixture run look even better. So next is Eze for Crystal Palace, who cost just 7 million, and there's a lot to like about him from an FPL point of view. First of all, the Crystal Palace fixtures are pretty good from an attacking sense. It's Brentford away game week 1, then West Ham at home, Chelsea away and Leicester at home. So that's the first 4. And then after that, it's Man United at home and Everton away. He's absolutely nailed on. He's going to start every single game, 90 minutes pretty much every match too. If it's a direct free kick, he's taking it. He's probably on penalties. His underlying numbers look good too. There's just a lot to like about him, especially when he only costs 7 million. The kind of player that you can just put in and will probably continue to tick over with points. And obviously, Mateta did really well for Crystal Palace last season as well. But he's 0.5 million more. I just don't really understand that. And when you look at points per game, Eze finished on 5 and Mateta was at 4.7. So Mateta did really well, but for 0.5 less, you get their talismanic midfielder instead. So I just don't really have a bad thing to say about Eze, and I think when you compare him to other midfielders in and around that price, he probably is one of the better options. Lots of people have said to me about Elise leaving and Crystal Palace being a worse team, and I think when you take out a player as good as Elise, you know, the overall team performance probably does come down, but I also think we over-exaggerate how much Palace get worse by. It's not like they suddenly become in a relegation battle or something like that. They're still going to score plenty of goals under Glasner, and if anything, Eze has to take up more of a role in making that happen. So they might be slightly worse overall, but I would expect Eze to be as involved as he was last year, if not even more. So if he gets penalties, which I'm pretty sure he will, I just think he's great for 7 million. Like, unless you think the fixtures are bad, I guess, right? Because I think they're all right, but I think you could reframe it as well. First 3 games, they got 2 away games. 1 is Chelsea. Game week 5, they got to play Man United. But if it's the same Man United defence that was there last year, in terms of how many shots they're conceding, and hopefully they will improve. But if it's similar, then that's not even a bad fixture. And when you've got someone that you just don't have to worry about because they're always playing and they've got other routes to points like penalties and direct free kicks, it just feels pretty good. So I've got him in my first draft. I think he will probably stay there up until the deadline. You never know. There's plenty of other players to think about. But at 7 million, he's one of the best attackers in the game, I would say. So speaking of £7 million midfielders, let's talk about Bryan Mbeumo next. Now, I am aware that I put Ivan Toney in my players to avoid video, and that is primarily because of the fixtures that Brentford have. So it's exactly the same situation for Mbeumo. They've got Liverpool away, City away, and Spurs away, open in 5 game weeks. So for that reason, I probably wouldn't go for him at the start of the season, but I would keep an eye on what happens with Ivan Toney. There is still speculation that he might leave Brentford this summer. I've got to be honest, the longer it goes on, the less likely I think it will happen, but it could happen. And if it does, there are penalties up for grabs, and you would assume the same as last season when Toney was suspended, that Mbeumo will take them. He's actually got a pretty similar technique to Toney and a good record. So if he gets penalties, suddenly you've got someone very similar to Eze, same price, takes penalties, and also good underlying numbers, 0.33 non-penalty expected goals per 90 last year, 0.26 expected assists. All of a sudden, he becomes a much better option. And unlike Toney, you've got 5 midfield spots. So it might be easier to fit someone like Mbeumo in, even though the fixtures are a little bit tougher, than it does to justify putting Tony in right now. And again, like I said in the players to avoid video, Tony is not a terrible option, but I think a midfielder at 7 million with penalties, with, okay, pretty poor fixtures to start, but someone that's nailed on to play and did really well last year when he was almost like the main man for Brentford. Like, they do have other attackers there, but when Tony's out of the picture, Mbeumo's the one they kind of rely on the most. Obviously, Visser, Sharda, etc. But Mbeumo would then be the main man, I think. So right now, I would probably avoid Mbeumo until the fixtures clear up a little bit. But if he suddenly gets penalties because Tony is gone, that does make him a much better option straight away and pretty good value. So I'm going to talk about Rodrigo Muniz next, a player that I mentioned earlier, a £6 million forward for Fulham, and just another player to add to that list of potentially really good value forwards alongside Chris Wood and João Pedro. And when he got into the Fulham team last year, he absolutely smashed it. There were very few games that he was benched for, and when he did start, he got plenty of returns. So it was 18 starts last season, nearly 1,600 minutes, and it was 9 goals, 2 assists. And not just the actual output that was good, his underlying numbers were decent as well, 0.49 non-penalty expected goals per 90, which is quite comparable to Chris Wood, who I spoke about earlier. Now, it is worth saying that is a small sample size. It's basically half a season, pretty much, and his first one at Fulham, right? So can he carry that on to next season? That remains to be seen. He's pretty young as well, but there is definitely a lot to get excited about for FPL if he can do similar that he did last season. And the fixtures are good too. So after Man United away in game week 1, it's Leicester at home and Ipswich away. So 2 newly promoted teams in the first 3 game weeks. Then it's West Ham at home, Newcastle at home, and Forest away. So I really like him. If I had to say right now, and obviously we're very early into pre-season when I'm recording this, out of him, Chris Wood and João Pedro, I'd probably have Muniz as the 3rd best, because I think João Pedro at 5.5, so cheaper than the other 2 and on penalties, is great. Chris Wood has done it for a longer time. The numbers are slightly better and the fixtures are just as good. And so Muniz probably is the 3rd out of those. But it could be that if you want to absolutely stack your midfield with like Salah, Palmer, Saka, Son, etc., maybe you want 3 cheap forwards and you could just go for all of them. So I really like Muniz. And I think he will do really well. But I think if they're all going to start and get regular minutes, he probably is the 3rd best out of them. But it doesn't mean he's bad. I think with those fixtures, he could absolutely smash it early doors. So it's not very often that goalkeepers make it into these videos, but I think being able to buy a Chelsea goalkeeper for just 4.5 million represents pretty good value. Now, they do have a few options in Sánchez, Petrovic and Kepa, so there is some uncertainty over who's going to be number 1, although I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea get rid of Kepa, but let's wait and see what happens. But the initial reports coming out from Matt Law at The Telegraph is that Maresca will choose Sánchez as his number 1. But either way, I don't think it really matters, because the closer we get to game week 1, Maresca will be asked about this in press conferences, and as long as he gives us a straight answer, we'll know who's number 1, and we'll know that they're just 4.5 million. If he says, I'm still undecided, then maybe we just look elsewhere. But right now, the potential value is definitely there. And if they do sign someone between now and then to play as the number 1 and they come in at 5 million, it's a different conversation. But right now, I think it looks really good value. Man City at home, not an easy fixture by any means, but after that, it gets good for Chelsea. And I'm just going to have a quick look at their longer term fixtures. So it's Wolves, Palace, Bournemouth, West Ham, Brighton up until game week 6. Then it's Forest at home, Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, United away, Arsenal at home. So there is some trickier fixtures from kind of game week 8 onwards. But I still think if you can get Chelsea's goalkeeper for 4.5, that looks pretty good, right? I'm just going to order, let me have a quick look here. I'm going to order the goalkeepers by price. Like other options for Bruggen, although he's probably going to miss the first 2 games of the season with injury. You got Flecken at Brentford. You got Henderson or Johnson at Palace. They're all not bad options. I just feel like if you've got a Chelsea goalkeeper, that just makes too much sense to me. So I know people will laugh about this pick, but I've got to include Marcus Rashford after his price has dropped down from 9 million to 7 million. And to be fair, if you were picking him based on last season alone, he'd be a complete avoid. His output was poor, his underlying numbers were terrible, and at certain parts of the season, he wasn't even starting games, right? He was on the bench. So it doesn't look good, but we know there is a player capable of fully outscoring that £7 million price point. And the fixtures for Man United are pretty good too. So it's Fulham at home game week 1, Brighton away game week 2, Liverpool at home game week 3, and Southampton away in game week 4. and he's fresh. He wasn't at the Euros. He's had the whole summer off. Hopefully this is a bit of a reset point for him, when next year he'll be ready to hit the ground running, and surely he'll be part of that first 11. We've seen, based on last year, he could lose his place if the performances aren't good enough, but I'm hoping that's not what's going to happen at the start of the season. And if we look back to previous seasons, okay, last year was really bad, 7 goals, 3 assists, but the season before, 17 goals, 7 assists. There's a reason that he was 9 million. And you've got another 17 goal season back in 2019-20. So before last year, 2 of the previous 4 seasons, 17 goals in each. So he is a player capable of doing a lot more. And we actually saw this happen previously. So in 2021-22, he got 4 goals, 2 assists, and he was 9.5 million. FPL dropped his price down to 6.5, and then he absolutely smashed it. I'm not saying because FPL dropped his price, but they made it so low, and all of a sudden he was really good value. And I just wonder if that can happen again this year. I think for a lot of people, they just won't go there, and I completely get that, right? I probably won't have him either, but there is potential for him to be extremely good value. And likewise, the same for Garnacho. 7 goals, 7 assists last year, and he's only 6.5 million. It looks like Sancho's staying, Antony's there as well. But right now, as things stand, you would probably say that Rashford and Garnacho are the 2 best options for Ten Hag to start in those wider positions. We shouldn't forget about Bruno Fernandes at 8.5, nailed on penalties, etc. 10 goals, 9 assists last year. But in terms of value, 8.5 is not a bad price, but he's not someone I would include in a video like this. So if you're really wanting to go someone different, then Rashford could be excellent at that price. But there's got to be significant improvements over last year, both for him and Man United in general. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. I'm sure there's plenty of players that I missed out that could have been included in this video, but there's also plenty of time during pre-season to talk about them. So if there is any value players you think I've missed, leave a comment below and I'll try and fit them in somewhere else and have a discussion about them. And if you haven't checked out Fantasy Football Hub, all the links you need are in the description below. And like I've said before, 50% off at the moment. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll catch you again tomorrow for another video.